I think we're in a very dangerous place, must be worse than a recession. Middle class is getting wiped out. We've been talking about this for months or longer. And this was at a time when the Fed was saying inflation is coming down. Wall Street's inflation is coming down. They're going to cut interest rates. The Fed was still saying we expect 3 interest rate cuts between now and the end of the year. I mean, they were saying this in the beginning of April, 3 interest rate cuts between now and the end of the year. Everyone thought that there would be no cut at the main meeting. Nobody thought that, but you still had June, July, September, November, December. That's 5 meetings. The Fed is on a crazy schedule. They don't need every month. It's like every 6 or 7 weeks, but 8 meetings a year is what it boils down to. So you had 5 meetings, June, July, September, November, and December. And you talked about 3 rate cuts. Okay, no problem. 5 meetings, 3 rate cuts. That seems to work. Except, and this is what we said a while ago, inflation is not coming down. Now, that's the story. That's the narrative, as Wall Street likes to talk about, because they just want to sell your stock. So it goes back a couple names. The first name is the pivot. When will the Fed pivot from rate hikes to rate cuts? That's the infamous pivot. They stopped hiking rates in July 2023. So that is true. They're just on hold for the time being, but they're not even close to a rate cut. And that's what we've been saying. But while she started talking about this 2 years ago, it was the summer of 2022. The Fed started raising interest rates in March 2022. At the time, rates were 0. When I say rates, we're talking about the Fed funds target rate. This was a really short-term overnight rate. We're not talking about 5-year notes and 10-year notes. Those are different, but in the US overnight rate that the Fed targets good was 0 at the beginning of March 2022. Well, they just started hiking in March 2022. They finished in July 2023. So the 15 months of rate hikes, and they got it up to 5.5%, which is where it is now. But while she started talking about the pivot in the fall of 2022, now they didn't say it was going to be that month, but they said you're early 2023, the Fed's going to cut rates. Well, then that turned into like mid 2023. And then it turned into late 2023. And then it turns into early 2024. Here we are in mid 2024. And they were still talking about it. But they've been wrong for almost 2 years. And we said they were wrong. We didn't say that they was going to raise rates. You can take that off the table. But we said they were definitely not even close to cutting rates. So what's the kind of backstory on inflation? Inflation peaked in June 2020 to 9.1%. And by the way, Mr. A quick footnote on the definition of inflation. It shouldn't be complicated, but people make it. So when I talk about inflation, I'm talking about the consumer price index CPI. It comes out monthly, computed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's measured on a year-over-year basis. So you look at the monthly index and say, what was it a year ago? That month. And then that's it. That's how they computed that peaked in June 2022. At 9.1%, by the way, the highest since the early 1980s. You got to go back over 40 years to find inflation. Op-ed was 9.4% by June 2023. So a year later, it didn't come down to 3%. The Fed was putting up the mission accomplished banner. Well, it wasn't mission accomplished. 9.1% down to 3%. Nice job. But it wasn't 2. I mean, they were trying to get to 2. They had weather for the last mile. I didn't get that last a little bit. Well, the problem is it's been going up ever since. So here we are almost 10 months after that low of 3% in June 2023. And its higher inflation is higher than the prior month. And this point, a prior year. So inflation is not just stuck, it is stuck. But it's actually been going up. All you have to look at that. And if you're worried about inflation, if that's your job, you're the Federal Reserve, your job is to get inflation under control. And inflation has stopped coming down and is starting to go up. How on earth are you going to cut interest rates? Well, the answer is you can't do it. Jay Powell was like, well, we've seen good data and we need a little bit more. He said, we're not quite there yet. We're just about there, but we need some confirmation, I think was the word to use. So a couple months like that, and then boom, we're ready to cut rates. They never got the confirmation it went up. And why was it going up? Well, oil prices were a big contributor. But oil prices go up as filters through the whole supply chain. So gas at the pump is an obvious one, by the way. If you go to AAA gas prices, AAA has a really good chart and prints. They get their finger on the pulse and they show regular gasoline nationwide average. They can break it down under ways, but regular gasoline nationwide average, that number is higher than it was last week, last month, and last year. It's been going up, push us in time for the election. This is not something that Joe Biden particularly wants to say, but it is such as gas at the pump is the most visible sign, and people, they know that he voted their gas pumps or half price went up against plus. We were to fill up my SUV, whatever it is, but that price filters into everything you buy because everything involves transportation. If gasoline is going up, diesel is going up, well, everything moves by truck or train as the case may be, but mostly trucks everything you buy in the store. Every loaf of bread, canned goods, fresh vegetables. Whatever it gets there by truck, and the trucks have to pay more for their diesel. They have to charge more for the freight, and then someone's going to have to raise the price of goods. So because of the transportation effect, which I just described, and a lot more airfares, jet fuel, etc., the price of oil and the price of refined products, gasoline, kerosene, which is jet fuel and diesel, go up, and then everything goes up. So that's one of the drivers. It's not the only one, but it's one of them. And how is it going to change? And the short run, 2 of the 3 biggest oil suppliers in the world are Russia and Saudi Arabia. Us is the other one. Well, the Russians and Saudi Arabia, and by extension OPEC recode, OPEC Plus are cutting down on production. Now they're fighting the tide. I mean, the world kind of wants to deflate, we disinflation, and that is happening around a lot of the rest of what's not happening in the United States. There are other reasons for that, including concerns about the geopolitics around just hijack the cargo vessel in the Straits of Hormuz. The Houthis have shut down the Suez Canal. The big oil tankers are going around to keep a good open South Africa. So long way, the oil's still getting through. I'm not saying that you're not going to be able to get guests. I'm just saying that if you add transportation costs and time delays and geopolitical uncertainty and other factors on top of what we've already seen, this is what you get. The economists always say when they dream about these things because they don't have enough to do. So I talked about CPI. Well, they invented CPI core. That's when you take out energy and food, and that's a little more well-behaved. Well, thanks, guys. See, energy. And food is what most people spend most of their money on. You can take them out and get a different time series if you want. But as somebody who actually they pay CPI, and then they came up with something called Supercore, or what Supercore was Supercore. You take out food, energy, and housing. Okay, so if you live in a tent and he canned goods, fine. But those are the 3 biggest things that people spend money on: gas, at the pump, food at the grocery store, and housing costs. And then, of course, the energy price feeds into home heating, air conditioning, whatever you have. This is like 70% of the average household budget, maybe more. And they said, well, we don't count that because we're eggheads, take everything I just said. And there's another inflation index called PCE, personal consumption expenditure. That's when the Fed uses same thing. PCE core, PCE super. It's all garbage. You can compute it. I understand it. I can look at a spreadsheet or an equation and understand it. But I also understand that that's not what people pay. People pay CPI that affects their attitude towards the economy, that affects the political outlook, that affects everyday behavior. It affects how they consumption. If I'm spending more at the gas pump, okay, I have that much less to, go out to dinner, buy show ticket versus new clothes or whatever it is. So this has ripple effects that are enormous. Some people, I would say, theoretically, you can distinguish between supply side inflation and demand side inflation, the difference really quickly. Supply side is kind of what we've been talking about. Oil shipments or reduced bottlenecks go back to 2021, 2022, when the supply chain broke down. And there are concerns about that. Economic sanctions coming out of the Ukraine war, new economic sanctions on Iran, those are all things that affect the supply side. But a funny thing can happen, which is if it persists long enough, it leaches over, spreads over to the demand side. The demand side is psychological. It's people saying, it's inflation, it's hanging around longer than we thought, it's getting worse. I was going to buy a new refrigerator in 6 months. Maybe I better buy it now before the price goes up. And then, a new car or furniture or whatever